Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's community forum, and I will start with the opening affirmation acknowledgement of the country, if we could please. All rise. We gather to represent the people of Albury who have entrusted us with this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, wisdom and common sense. May our personal values give us honesty and courage to serve our community effectively and with respect for all. Acknowledgement of country, we'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay our respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. Recording and live streaming of the community forum. This community forum is being audio recorded for administrative purposes. By speaking at the community forum, you agree to being recorded. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this community forum that you're respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of the community forum. Okay. Conflict of interest declarations. I've not been made aware of any. Apologies. Do we have any apologies? Ms. Leopold, are you aware of any apologies at this point?
I've not received any apologies.
Okay. I understand Councillor Cameron is unavailable, but it's not required or mandatory that he be here, but he did tell me his way on work commitments, but no other apologies? Yes, Ms. Leopold?
An apology from CEO Frank Sacknich.
Yeah, I believe he's on sick leave. That's fine. Okay. All right. Well, we'll move right into the planning matter, and certainly it's CF 5.0, the Thurgoona-Willingets precinct structure plan. And the first speaker is our own David Christie, and Mr. Christie will lead the group through what has come forward at this point, and then we'll have the other speakers hot on his heels. Thanks, Mr. Christie. Should be on, I reckon.
Thank you, councillors and members of the community. So the purpose of my presentation this morning, bit of a rehash of the two previous PMBS presentations you got, but just setting the context around the structure plan, the process of review, just a broad summary of the submissions raised and the next steps through from here. And then obviously later on, individual speakers will speak about their submissions and their concerns in or support in regards to the structure plan. If I turned it on. So just a bit of an overview for reminders that the public exhibition, the structure plan, was from May to July in 2025. There are 43 submissions from a variety of members of the public, government agencies and major landholders in the area. We've got community forum now, obviously, for a number of those people to be able to make representations direct to councillors about issues that they wish to talk to you about. And then next Monday night, we have the council meeting, where you'll consider whether to adopt the structure plan as exhibited, adopt with recommended changes or any other component thereof. We have made a recommendation of staff that it be adopted with some changes, and those have been outlined in the information that's been available to councillors for a bit over a week and a bit now, but it's also been available to the public in that period of time as well. And just a reminder that the structure plan doesn't make any changes to our planning controls. We need to go through a planning proposal process and amendments to the DCP to then enact it into planning legislation. But obviously, as a structure plan, as a council document, it does hold some weight, but to give it more weight, then we go through those planning processes. Again, just a reminder of the purpose of a structure plan. It is a very high level document. It's looking at the next 30 to 40 years worth of growth. It's not looking at individual subdivision layouts. It looks more broadly at interconnectivity, at open space, spatial distribution of a variety of components, whether they be shopping opportunities, whether they be open space opportunities, potential locations for schools into the future, etc. But it's not going to dive into a number of components which will be more relevant for other council documents. And again, just it's a 2-year process we've been dealing with going through from here, from 2023 when we launched the project, 2024 when we put out the discussion paper, and then obviously 2025 early this year where we put out the draft structure plan for comment. Some of those key changes, it is a review of the existing structure plan. That review of the existing structure plan showed it was quite a good structural document, but there needed to be some improvements. Needed to consider a number of council policies and state government policies and a variety of things that had changed in a dozen years since its original adoption, and try to have it look around how it reflected on what I was looking at now for the next 10 to 15 years. Especially in that shorter time frame. So I did revise some things, such as some of the opportunities for shops and community centres, sports grounds and park locations, layout of some of the roads, reference to state government policies, and the potential location of schools, consolidation and location of those schools. And also started to look at defining opportunities for medium density and some more density in residential components around some of those activities areas, such as the parks, the shops and the schools. It was also looking at making some adjustments, especially around biodiversity value, and flowed on from some of the work that came up as part of our conservation zone land review. Was more appropriate to deal with as part of this structure plan rather than that original process. And it'll also introduce some components that I said are reflective of existing strategies that have been adopted by council since 2013, such as a drainage strategy, the potential for the productivity support zone, which wasn't around at that point in time. And also a key bit was putting in an action plan or implementation plan about what are the next steps about putting this action at the Wigadjuri Precinct Structure Plan into place on the ground and in our planning documents. Just a picture of the actual draft structure plan as was exhibited. A reminder that this was part of that broad context we're doing around securing Albury's future together, which also included a social infrastructure plan, our water and wastewater master plans, and that interim contributions plan update. Won't go into this into any detail, but just a rehash of the public consultation components over that 6-week period, a number of drop-in sessions, number of opportunities to meet staff one-on-one, and also with meetings, especially with government agencies around what their input may be. As I said earlier, 43 submissions came in either via the web form on our site, but also emails and letters. We did meet with all those opportunity for those individual submitters to meet with staff to see how staff had responded to their issues, and 20 of those 43 submitters took advantage of that opportunity to discuss with staff how we're responding to their submission. Overall, there was general support for the structure plan and what it was proposing to do. Some of the community submissions raised concerns or issues just around traffic congestion and management, the opportunity for more shops and parks and connectivity, and also how we appropriately protected the environment and biodiversity in Figuna. A number of the landowner developer submissions were looking at changes that might more particularly align with their actual development aspirations for individual sites. And then some of our response to that has been around whether it's at the structure plan stage or some of that stuff might be more appropriately prosecuted through individual DAs at that point in time. And then finally, overall, government agencies provided a number of submissions, generally supportive. There was the major changes in response to the size of school zones in accordance with Department of Education guidelines. As I said before, these were the key issues raised for the community. I won't belabor those points, just talk through those. Same for government agencies. The ones that we got genuine support from was DECU, Department of Planning, Housing Infrastructure, Homes New South Wales, Prime Ministries and Regional Development. Education, as I said, requested the issue of around making certain the school sites were appropriately sized for their minimum 3 hectares for most of their school sites. They did want to put a disclaimer there as well that they hadn't identified or set where their future sites may be in person at this stage, and some of those sites there were for indicative information purposes. They weren't guaranteed they would provide schools at those particular locations. This map just gives a bit of an indication of the spatial distribution of the key landowners that made submissions to us. Some of those ones that are in green, there were some changes made in response to their submissions, and the ones there in the blue, there were no changes made in response to their submissions. And again, the information you'll have before you, before next council meeting next Monday night, goes into far more detail about those individual submissions. And as I said, this here was just giving you an idea of some of those key components. And probably one of the things that we wish to reinforce and really stress is just the role of that structure plan versus an individual DA process, and diving in to that more detailed analysis that you would do with an individual DA rather than a structure plan that covers over 4,500 hectares of land in Figuna. Key thing to reinforce as well from our end is the structure plan is really beginning of the process of implementing once it's adopted by council. There's a number of things that we still need to do then to bring it into place, as I said earlier. So we already started to work on the planning proposal and the development control plan amendments in anticipation of once the structure plan is endorsed by council, whether it's the 8th of December meeting or at a future meeting, then obviously we can start to fill in the gaps for that planning proposal and development control plan amendments, and then start to get that exhibited probably around the middle of next year. Some also work that's also happening outside of the city development area, but within council around our updating of engineering guidelines, which will also take into account a number of the detailed components, especially that came up in submissions around things like street design, et cetera, et cetera. There's another couple of things occurring. The 8 Mile Creek flood study will come into council in February, seeking permission to exhibit. That will also inform the structure plan. It might mean there's some minor amendments once that drainage information and the flooding information comes in, but we'll be able to look at that once it's in before council. There's a review of the Faguna drainage strategy also occurring during 2026. And then there's also some concept plans just to ground truth those areas that are needed for district sports grounds and local parks, etc. So just reinforcing the next steps are the council meeting on Monday night, and then working on that implementation plan. So more than welcome happy to take any questions, or we can go direct to the speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Councillors, any questions? No? All good, Mr. Christie. We can go straight into the speakers. Thank you. Okay, let's start with CF 6.2, Jonathan Howard. Thank you, Jonathan. And Council, you'll see a note in front of you that indicates that there are point reference material and material that Jonathan has relied his presentation upon.
Hi,
Thanks,
everyone. In case you don't know, I'm president or chair of the Faguna Community Group. And the bad news for you all is I've given you all homework. And that is between now and December the 8th, I'm going to ask you to sit down sometime on your computer and look up some of those references there, because they back up the assertions that I will try and make tonight. So what I'm really asking you for is to make evidence-based policy in regards to the structure plan. All right, as David intimated, there's 43 submissions to the draft plan that was out. 10% of them were actually talking about biodiversity and environmental values in there. One person complained about the multi-use corridors that exist next to her house because it creates noise, there's wildlife, there's mixing of bike paths and pedestrians, there's hazardous nature of the creek, and it's a lack of privacy just simply from those particular things. Now, I'm just giving you that an example because the Faguna-Warringah draft structure plan talks about these multi-use corridors, these green-blue corridors, and they just won't function at that particular width that's being proposed in the plan. Another one stated that there was a lack of corridors. One person who lived near Somerset Rise said, there's no park, no kids resorts, no places for us to go around here. So they're problems that are in the existing structure of Faguna, and I think we need to look at those and looking to our future. TCAG made several submissions. I think we made 19 points in our submission. Most of them were just either acknowledged or just, I wouldn't say ignored, but just disregarded, I guess, to some degree. So what I want to focus on is one particular point, and that's about the blue-green network in the draft plan and the aspects that will allow it to fulfill its role to provide wildlife, to let people move, to let the water flow, to provide for a mix of recreation use and provide for people's health and well-being. Specifically, the 3 points I want to talk about is the zoning south of Riverina Highway. The proposed zoning goes from low density to, as you get out towards the river, a less dense area of between 50, where it's 50 metres per house in the diagrams, if you look at it, and 100 metres per house in the larger allotments. We think that there should be zoned, particularly towards the river, large lot residentials of 212 metres as suggested in the draft plan, rather than just simply go from 50 to 100 metres. You'll have to look up that particular page to see what I'm talking about there. But the reason why we think that is because there's the Riverina Murray Regional Plan, which suggests we should aim to incorporate waterfront areas into open space networks and prioritise public access. There's also the riverfront plan that's out there in draft form by the Department of Planning that talk about having continuous riverfront open space along the western rivers of New South Wales. And you can think of this in the areas that you live around today. So if you think of Noriel Park and how that's valued, I'm not saying we should create a Noriel Park out there, but that green space is really important to the people who live in Albury, just as that green space will be important to the development of those people that live in that southern area south of Riverina Highway. The second thing I want to talk about is that the plan seeks to keep hillscapes east and northwest of the precinct at around 350 metres. Now, if you think of the existing landscape within Thurgoona, the most valuable green space in that area is a lot lower than that. It's around about 220, 250 metres. Places like Corrie Wood provide really important recreational space for the people who are living there. So we think that that 350 metres, which is way off in the distance and really quite steep, is probably too high for the people to enjoy that are going to be living in Thurgoona in the future. The other thing I want to talk about is the desire to co-locate communities and facilities and parks with natural assets. But we know that things like squirrel gliders don't like light pollution. We know that there's a whole pile of birds and other species which will move away from those areas simply because they don't coexist with high intensity human activity. In fact, if you think of your own backyard, it's probably only magpies and sulphur crested cockatoos and rainbow lorikeets live in those sort of areas, not the other species there. The other thing I'd like to add in top of that is we know that dogs and wildlife don't mix. So that's a real problem there. So the average length of these corridors is meant to be about 20 metres. But if you look at some of the literature within the stuff that I've given you, they're talking more about these mixed corridors having to be about 50 to 30 metres in width because they require buffer zones and a whole range of other things in order to let the wildlife and the multiple uses exist. Is that my buzzer to tell me I'm finished? It is, right. Well, thank you very much. Oh, I'm just about finished, really. All I was really going to add is that, you know, this is a vision about city and nature, and the Thurgoona Community Action Group is not really against development, but it's about appropriate development and about communities and lifestyles that will live in that particular area.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Councillor Callaghan?
Thank you for your presentation, Jonathan. I just had a follow-up question to your reference to the mixed corridors. It said average length 20, but you're suggesting that mixed corridors really should be 30 to 50 metres in width. And I'm sure you've addressed that in your submission. What was the feedback from Albury City Council on that, if you can recall?
20 metres was adequate. Okay. So these, just to add on that, if I may, to Councillor Callaghan, is that the literature is out there about these sort of blue-green corridors. It's not a new term. And if you looked it up, you would find that these exist in Chinese cities, they exist in Los Angeles and a whole range of other places. And so this is empirical evidence that talks about, well, what should that width be? And the minimum distance is actually 20 metres, the absolute minimum. But what we're talking about here in the structure plan is an average here. So there'll be some that are less and some that are wider.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Question, Councillor Hudson?
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Thank you for your presentation, Jonathan. I was hoping you could elaborate a bit more on the blue-green corridors. So you've said that essentially the staff have maintained in their response to you that the 20-metre average width is sufficient. Was there much discussion? Was there much justification or reference to evidence, best practice, so forth?
And his staff are very professional. They've got a lot of planning background there. You know, I'm not denying that at all. But when it comes to somebody from the community basing an argument against somebody who's a professional in that particular area, what I needed to do in order to make a balanced decision on this is to actually draw on the evidence that's out there. So what has the research done to date? And I guess I'm drawing on my academic background to say, well, I'll do the search and find that for you. And then in your own leisure time, you can then have a look at some of that stuff. There's stuff from Victorian government. There's 2 or 3 documents from the Victorian government that look at that particular aspect about these blue-green corridors. And they're actually suggesting it should be wider as well. So it's not just overseas, it's Australian locally as well.
Further, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you. I think you did basically preempt my next question, which was as other examples from closer to home that we can look at or point to, and you've indicated that Victoria have spoken about it. My question then is about connectivity for transport, particularly active transport and public transport. What did TWCAG think about the precinct structure plan and its references to that?
Well, I might just answer your previous question a bit more. Some of those Victorian documents give you case studies. So there's particular ones of Bendigo and things like that you'll find in those particular areas. So that would be useful. It's not just the government document. There's examples on that. Now to go to your current question. We said in our submission, which is different to our key main point tonight, which was saying you've got a whole lot of strategies in council, such as the bike plan and public transport plan and all those other plans that don't seem to be integrated into this particular document very well. It's not really well considered how that will all play out together. So there's a need, I think, from memory, I forget which council meeting I went to that said this. They talked about Thurgoona having the second highest rate of car ownership in Australia. And I can see some of you all nodding about that. And it's because the whole design is for everybody who lives in Thurgoona to get out and go to places where they work, such as Wodonga or Albury City or wherever that may be. And that's shown in the traffic data. That's probably showing you on average there's not a need to build new networks. But if you go there at 5 o'clock or at 9 o'clock, you get these huge peaks. It's almost like and I'm sorry if I'm going to stuff that I'm familiar with. If you look at the Murray-Darling Basin and the climate change that's happening in there, you're getting these huge shifts from, flood to drought quite rapidly. And I think you're finding that with the traffic volumes, that same pattern with Thurgoona. And so we do need more public transport and more bike paths, more passive access if you talked about active access. Yeah.
So in your mind, the plan isn't clear enough as far as providing for active and public transport connectivity. Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, I think there should be a process where you look at your current existing policies and plans and say, well, how does this fit into the documents? Where does it go? And example of that, I think, and I'm probably going off memory, which David might be able to correct me on at some stage, but if we look at the proposed public school that's out near Kerrs Road, the parking there for buses is probably going to be on the main thoroughfare route, which is, madness to my degree and some degree in my thinking. And also at Trinity, we've talked about public access and the buses there, and that again will be on is it Elizabeth Mitchell? Yeah, Elizabeth Mitchell Drive, which will block a major thoroughfare to TAFE, the suburbs north and Charles State University. It's got to be, the buses have got to come off so they've got time for people to move back and forth.
thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you for your presentation and just sort of noting some of the points in your submission, which was great. But would you be happy to send a summary of your submission to your comments tonight to councillors for that extra, I think the 3-point summary that you talked about to really narrow our focus? If you're happy to forward that as well, that'd be great. And perhaps even, we might get a soft copy of this, and so it's easy to click onto some of the links that you provide.
Hyperlinks, yes, sure, Councillor King, we'll do that.
Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question, if I may, and it was really in regard to the open space and recreation needs revision. Can you talk a little bit more to that? You mentioned in here outdoor recreation, leisure, play spaces needs a little bit more attention. Can you elaborate a little bit further?
Yes, sure. So there seems to be an emphasis on the plan, from my perspective, on formal play spaces such as ovals and on those sort of things. Whereas when you look at the health and wellbeing, whether it be from New South Wales Health or a whole range of other things, there's a whole need for less formal aspects. And you can watch it in action around Thurgoona. And I know, Kylie, you live near Thurgoona, but if you drive through that suburb early in the morning, you'll see that there's people just walking together in twos or threes. So there's that social aspect of just getting together and talking with each other. There's also the idea of people having to get to a mindfulness stage, I think, under psychology, which is about just that switching off and just getting into rhythm. So that's a whole range, and I'm sure, Councillor Hudson, you'd know that from your experience in health, that there's a whole range of health and wellbeing benefits that arrive from these non-formalised team sports that you just allow people to get out and either exercise informally or just talk to people.
Follow up.
Just briefly, I suppose it leads back to your statement and your question to Councillor Hudson, really in regards to connectivity around Thurgoona and how that could be improved. They're all seemingly interlinked as well.
Yeah, Councillor Callaghan, I think from where I've been living in Thurgoona is it's really well connected in the old suburbs. And, you know, you can go up to Corries Wood and there's all these bike paths and it's not having to walk around a suburb to get there. There's all these small pathways through there. And these might be little narrow corridors. But if you've been to Canberra, which I'm sure everybody has been to Canberra, you know, some of those parkways, which are in low-lying areas that provide bike paths and things like that, are just great areas to access. You don't need to walk around a suburb because it's block-shaped. You can meander your way straight through different areas. So that's the sort of thing that we think should happen in the areas out east of Albury, but it's not happening. Indeed, I might have the name wrong, but if you look at the urban forest strategy, which you all looked at, there was an example in that about Yarrabee Park, I think it was, where the blocks were so small that there was no option for any of the residents to try and achieve the urban forest strategy because there's just no room to plant trees on those blocks that are so close together, because there's a desire by the developers to make smaller blocks, which are within the LEP or DCP plan, but there's also a desire by the private landholder to build a McMansion, so to speak, a big house if they can.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, no further questions, Jonathan. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you for your time and thanks for listening to me.
No problem. Okay, we're up to Mr. Lawrence Young. Thank you, Lawrence.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors and council management and staff. I'm Lawrence Young and my wife and I are owners of the property named Springview, which is bordering Kerr Road and Thurgoona Drive. My interest in commuting, to talk to the councillor is in regard to the precinct plan. We have had a number of meetings with the council staff like Bridget, Cindy and others, and David Christie in regarding to the sort of precinct structure plan. I think the 2013 plan sort of designated area along Thurgoona Drive where they treat that area north of Thurgoona Drive as sporting area. My real concern, and I've expressed that with the council staff on numerous occasions and submissions, in that we have been cooperating and discussing about the arrangement where the sports ground and the environmental area happen. And I think it's been good that the council have actually agreed to sort of move the sporting area north of Thurgoona Drive into closer to the environmental area that separate the other blocks. We don't really have a concern in regard to having sporting activity or ground and the land that we own. But the issue is that the council, for whatever reason that we do not understand, had, I believe, earmarked some 21 hectares of land with 4 ovals in the area that we have. I mean, we cannot fathom which city or suburb where you have 4 consecutive oval ground when Albury and Levington Sports Ground and in Albury itself have numerous sporting ground. Then how on earth do you really need 4 sporting ground in an area, and how do you schedule any sporting activity concurrently or on 4 sporting activity on 21 hectares. I mean, it's just a bit mind-boggling. And on top of that, and I presume, if the proposal is to create the sporting and, the district sporting ground, the council would acquire the land, from us. And that is a very expensive acquisition. And then on top of that, you have the construction cost and then the maintenance and everything. And I do not believe that the Albury Council have really the need to sustain such an operation. And we have seen, in Sydney where council have renovate swimming pool and others, and then go into huge debt that they want to recover the money through increased council rate, by 100%. And I don't think that is something that the Albury Council would want to do, to have sporting ground that really don't have any revenue generating activity to pay for itself. So the purpose of my addressing the council is to ask you to consider whether there's really such a need for such number of sporting ground and the area that need to be assigned. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Young. Question from Councillor Hudson.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Young. Just wondering, so you've spoken about you think that we've essentially over provided in the plan for sporting grounds. Are you aware of how much area Alexandra Park takes up in East Albury?
21 hectares assigned for sporting activity is enormous.
Follow-up question then. It's 27 hectares or thereabouts. No, the Alexandra Park in East Albury is approximately 27 hectares. And so given that we're projecting the population of Thurgoona to increase from, roughly speaking, 13,000 residents now to 45,000 residents by 2045, I believe, although I'm happy to be corrected on the specifics of that, do you not accept that we actually do have a significant need for additional sporting facilities?
If you already have a sporting ground in Alexandra of that size, why you need more? I mean, I know Albury would longer have sporting team and get into the team and all that, but that means if you're going to have 21, 27 and Levington and all this, I mean, that seems to be overly endowed with sporting activities. For a population of less than 100,000 in Albury?
Final follow-up question. So the precinct structure plan has been developed by council's planning staff with, basically equations and evidence in mind that looks at the need for certain areas. For example, we know this, we expect this many residents, so therefore we expect this much need for shops, floor space, this much need for parking and so forth. So I can't really speak for the staff, but I would imagine that the need for sporting grounds and open space has been developed along a similar line. I suppose my question to you is, do you then think that, or do you reject the evidence that the staff would have used to justify the need for that?
I have not been given or a knowledge of what the rationale for us having sporting ground in that area. And in fact, Albury, Thurgoona and the surrounding area, along with Arena Highway, have plenty of land that you could have a sporting activity and closer to transportation, in terms of access through Riverina Highway, and so on. So I don't really even think that it having to go to the sporting activities through at the moment Kerr Road, and it comes to basically a dead end in there is how should I conducive to traffic movement at all. that is actually, to me, a wrong location for sporting activity. You should be having sporting activity, you know, I mean, closer to, you know, the Riverina Highway where you have transportation, you know, easier than where it is planned.
Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Lawrence Young. I was hoping I can ask a question of a staff member, if that's possible.
Yes, Mr. Christie, I assume.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Memak, to Mr. Christie. It's just, I suppose, in response to Mr. Young's statement that he hadn't received any rationale or evidence as to why the 21 hectares was decided upon. Can you elaborate and provide that?
Yep, happy to, and hopefully that microphone's working. Yeah, so the original 2013 structure plan had two components. There was the district sports ground, which was at 15 hectares, and the district park, which was at 4.6 hectares. In relocating the sports ground and district park to the north, as we talked through, the district park remained the same size of 4.6 hectares. The district sports ground did increase slightly from 15 to 17 hectares, but it's also recognition of the fact that it's now at the confluence of a number of streams. And so there may be some constraints on that site. So information around that 8 Mile Creek flood study, etc., we'll be able to work out whether we require the entirety of that 17 hectares. But it was a little bit conservative in that respect to make certain it was a suitably unconstrained area of land for to be able to have a look at. Councillor Hudson did give the indication there also of around some similar sizes. So Gelbart Park's around, off the top of my head, around 11 or 12 hectares. With a number of sports infields, and then also its location is really due to the fact that when we looked at the Figunalinga precinct structure plan, we separated it into the fixed areas where most of the development has already occurred, and the malleable areas we talked about, which is areas where development is to occur, and that, one of a better word, call it that eastern and northeastern quadrant is a very significant area of population and housing. And so putting it up there would also keep it within that centralisation. Yes, it's not there now, but bearing in mind the structure plan is looking at 30 to 40 years in, it will become part of that Figuna development as it goes through.
Thank you.
Comment that the 2013 precinct plan was done, I think, without thorough knowledge of the land and the area, because you know, they had previously mentioned in the 2013 precinct plan, they have a village and a school, you know, south of the Gunner Drive, and then having the Kerr Road move a bit forward north to there, and then they have a commercial or town center north on top of the environmental area that at the moment the company Northcon has acquired the property, and so in fact the whole destination of the town center in an environmental area, the sporting activity on the Gunner Drive is all completely based on no facts at all and incorrect. So in fact, the 2013 basis from which further PSP are being built is based on a wrong foundation or a wrong premise.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Young. There are no further questions. Thank you for your presentation tonight. Thank you, Mr. Christie. Okay, we've got Mr. David Hunter and Adam Dodd. Has he turned up, David, or? Okay. So Mr. Hunter is more than capable of presenting the next three on his own. Is it the same presentation or different presentations, David? Okay, we'll stick with the David Hunter and Adam Dodd one to start with. Thank you.
Absolutely. I thought I would have a couple of people joining me tonight for the first two, but it might just be me. So yeah, thank you firstly for the opportunity to come along and talk tonight. It's been a long process, but a very important process, and one that we're really pleased to see coming to an end, not for bad reasons, but I think, you know, we're all looking forward to seeing this plan come forward and start to see some of the implementation. So yeah, thanks to Dave, Cindy and Bridget for all the work you've been doing, and particularly lately for consultation and engagement. That was something that I was really keen to see, and a night like tonight's very worthwhile. So the first one I'll speak to tonight is just in relation to Nordcon land holdings. So there's a lot of information in our submission, which I think you all have access to and have probably read through it. But their parcel of land is quite a significant piece of land between Kerr Road and Dairy Lane, in just above the Jung family land, and probably one of the most significant parts of the PSP in our opinion. So a large part of that submission is talking about the master planning exercise that's been ongoing now for about 3 years. That was an initiative of both Nordcon and the Jung family, who recognised, I guess, the importance of their land and the role it was going to play even before the PSP was underway at council. So that's all been funded by those two landowners. It's been shared with council as much as possible, recognising, of course, that the PSP is underway and that needs to happen through formal channels. But that was out of looking forward and wanting to ensure that the future landowners could have an integrated development outcome that wouldn't result in portions of the land being developed in isolated lots, open space and drainage and those sorts of things being considered on an individual basis, which I think has been a really successful outcome. And generally, we've seen that translate through into the structure of the PSP. We fully understand we're going to do a master plan and we're going to put things forward, and we may not get everything we want. But we have put forward some suggestions, and to council's credit, they have taken those on board, and where appropriate, they've put those elements into the plan, which is great to see. I think there's a couple of components in the land holdings that we could talk to that we still think need a little bit of work. One of those is probably the dispersion of the open space. So continuing on a little bit from what Lawrence was talking about, it does feel as though it is very concentrated. It is better to see it moved closer together. We support the moving of the MNC more centrally, particularly now that we've recognised the environmental constraints in the north. So moving that centre down, bringing the open space up to it is a good outcome. We think there's potentially more opportunities to integrate open space in smaller, more dispersed areas, but I've noted the feedback that we've had from council around considering that in future development, and I guess we'll take that on board. Drainage would be the other one that we've identified through our master planning work on those two properties. The Thurgoona drainage strategy, in our opinion, probably needs a review alongside the PSP, and I think that's coming in the future. But when you look at this precinct in particular, there's a couple of very large indicative basins, but we'd question whether that's the best outcome rather than dispersing those further up and looking at those in smaller portions, particularly bearing in mind that's what the Sloane's Froglet is calling for, or Sloane's Froglet design. I probably will just quickly move on. That's probably enough on the Nordcon holding. I did register as well to talk about that. We made two other submissions in relation to Alatello land, who are jointly developing with Nordcon. And just quickly on, there were two submissions we made to theirs. One is the Hawkescote development, which is a very significant development south of Riverina Highway, which there's an active DA on that one, but there has been an ongoing master planning process for probably about 10 years, maybe more, that I haven't been fully involved with, but certainly recently through the DA process, some of the big issues that have emerged with that, which I'll talk about in some other submissions as well, would be the Riverina Highway and the treatment of that centre location. We think that there hasn't been enough consideration in the PSP around what the future of the Riverina Highway and Kerr Road is going to look like. That's a very significant piece of land. A very significant intersection, and our land on the Hawkescote side is fully residential, interfacing with that road. We're not sure really what the best outcome, whether the best outcome has been considered through the PSP, and we think there needs to be more advocacy work in the implementation, and we're very happy to continue that. We've already started in our DA. I'm happy to leave it at that.
Mr. Hunter, in relation to the Alatello land, is it part of these presentations or
Yeah, sorry.
Peter Henry?
No, sorry. This was in relation to, we registered for the Nordcon and the Alatello
Oh, so that's
components.
the
They were
first one,
together.
yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is all in relation to the first one. So
So have you finished with that one?
Yep.
So we can ask questions?
Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
No worries. Councillor Hudson?
Thank you, David, for your presentation. I was hoping you could elaborate on just a couple of things that you mentioned. So, for example, you said you think the drainage strategy needs a review, and that there's the draft PSB has some very large, so indicatively large basins in it, and you think that that would be better if they were more distributed. Could you just elaborate on that point for me?
I believe we've shared and should be in the information that was with our submission. We did have a look at the entire catchment from a drainage perspective again. In the original Thurgoona drainage strategy, for example, one of the largest basins in that catchment was on the C3 land in the middle of Sandy Creek, which obviously can't be developed because of that outcome. So what we looked at was actually dispersing the drainage along the linear networks of creek rather than in a large basin at the bottom of the catchment. It was actually distributed in a number of basins working back along the creek. And there were benefits to that around that we were able to create a number of Sloane's froglet wetland habitats rather than just having one right at the end, if that makes sense. And you can see that if you look at the master plan, those areas that we've identified for drainage.
All right.
As far as providing smaller basins rather than larger ones, that would be wonderful if we could produce more Sloane's froglet breeding habitat. Are there technical or cost reasons why it's preferable for the developers to do that?
Yeah. We've got to build drainage infrastructure. Whether we do it in one location or multiple locations doesn't really make a lot of difference. I think our view was more from an urban design perspective. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's Basin 7, which is at the corner of the Sandy Creek and the east-west drainage line. I'm not sure what its name is, but it's a very large L-shaped basin, and we've got a neighbourhood centre on one side and an open space or a residential interface with a large drainage basin, almost like a moat wrapping around one side of it, as opposed to reducing that size, actually making a better connection across the reserve, giving it a better interface with the open space. It's more of, I'm not an engineer, so I can't really answer your question other than the design was more about an urban design outcome.
Two follow-up questions.
Sure.
One to Dave Christie, or through to the most relevant member of staff, I should say. As far as the plan, it's obviously indicative, it's very high level, it's a structure plan. Regarding the placement of these basins, is that and the concerns and opportunities that Mr. Hunter has identified, is that something that we really need to look at changing for the plan now, or is this something that's more easily dealt with at an individual DA level?
Yep. Thanks.
Christie.
Yep. Thanks for the question and for you, Mayor Mac. So in short, the answer is your second component. The location and strategy and size of Basin 7.1, which is one that Dave's talking about, which does wrap around the DSG, that still needs to be informed by the 8 Mile Creek flood study, as I mentioned, and as I said earlier, review with the Thurgoona drainage strategy. So in essence, what that has done is we took that basin outside of the C3 land, which is where it currently is in the drainage strategy, took it outside of the C3 land, but other than that, it remained the same in the absence of that updated strategy. And it would be very appropriate that if a DA comes in prior to considering the updated strategy or 8 Mile Flood and 8 Mile Flood Creek study might have us make the change in advance. But if that change isn't made in advance by ourselves with that more detailed information, it'll be very appropriate for a DA for that detailed subdivision design then to determine the potential locations of that basin with consideration of the fact that we do have that principle of keeping them out of the C3 areas now to make certain that's appropriate. So that is going to have some potential impacts around where it's located and also how it may interface with either the DSG or the District Park 1 as well to make certain it doesn't reduce their usable area, that if it's adjacent to them, that it's still appropriate and those areas are still functional in their size and format.
Okay, thank you. And with your indulgence, my last question was unrelated to drainage. It was, you mentioned that not enough consideration had been given to the future of the Riverina Highway and Kerr Road intersection. Could you just elaborate on that?
In the next submission as well, but the Hawkesgate development, I think it's about 250 metres, also it might even be more, of actually, in fact, it's way more than that, of frontage to the Riverina Highway. At the moment, it's an entirely residential interface on an 80-kilometre-hour road. I guess from our perspective, we're asking the question as part of our detailed design, what treatment are we doing for an 80-kilometre-hour road? Because it's most likely people aren't going to want to live on a road like that. If that was a slower environment around our centre and there were some opportunities for some other mixed uses, then that's probably a more suitable urban design outcome. And it probably gives the focus on it being a centre. We're creating a neighbourhood centre in that location. We're probably wanting people to slow down and use the services that are there and not fly through at 80 kilometres an hour.
We don't want to build a straight. A strode,
No.
which is a
Yep.
street and road,
Yes.
for those who don't know what that means.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Councillor Callaghan, question.
Thank you for your presentation. And this is really a question for the most relevant staff member, Mayor Mack. You mentioned just in your presentation in regards to the MNC3 centre, and I can see in your submission you've moved it down slightly to the corner. I was just hoping Mr. Christie could provide some rationale as to why it is currently sitting above where you've suggested.
Mr. Christie?
Yep, thanks for the question and for you, Mayor Mack. So the submission was to move it. We have agreed one of the changes that's outlined in attachment 5 is that we had recommended that actually be relocated as per the suggestion, so slightly to the southwest. So obviously not as per page 11 of the structure plan at the moment, but it'll be relocated in accordance with the request. Obviously there still may be, and I keep harking back to the 8 Mile Creek flood study, but there may be some implications that come out of that may need to look at what's appropriate for that area. But at this stage, we've agreed to that change.
Thank you for clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. Councillor Bullivan, question.
Thank you, Mayor Mack. Through you, the relevant member staff. I just thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hunter. Mr. Hunter mentioned the road, which would be the Riverina Highway. Have we got any oversight for future reference to what's going to happen to the Riverina Highway with all the development going on in that area?
Ms. Leopold.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Bullivant, through you, Mayor Mack. So the road authority for the Riverina Highway is state government, Transport for New South Wales. And in terms of our long-term planning, there is a Riverina Highway corridor strategy that we work with Transport for New South Wales on regularly, and also in terms of prioritisation and advocacy. A part of this strategic planning process has highlighted that we do need to advocate around the future strategic use of that corridor. Currently serves as an 80-kilometre-an-hour highway out of Albury, but the reality is it's heading to our newer population, so needs to be fit for purpose for that as well. So we'll continue to work with Transport for New South Wales in terms of our long-term strategic focus in line with the intended developments in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leopold. No further questions. Just Mr. Hunter, being on the chair of the floodplain committee, we were looking at the 8 Mile Creek strategy only last week, and it does include the outliers, including, did you say it's Sandy Creek? I don't see it's listed on the map as being anything, but I do see it meandering down through to Thurgoona Drive. But there's a lot of discussion about placement of retention basins and other things that will be informed by that study. So as Mr. Christie has indicated, a lot of the stuff that you've put in, I looked at yours before, it's what we've put in is indicative, but will be informed by that study and further studies that will occur with Woolshed Creek as well. So it's just not an applied science. This is an indicative map, but the reality is the hydraulics of what happens in an urban environment are pretty high priority in our considerations. So there is a number that I'm aware of that need to be included as part of the developments, because otherwise we're exposing urban areas to flooding. So that's really the way forward. Okay, thank you. You've got the next one, which is Travis Barker's submission. He's not here.
Yeah, so the next submission is in relation to what we're terming the Kerrs Corner. There's a group of landowners who purchased the triangular piece of land on the corner of Kerr Road and Riverina Highway. In the original structure plan, that was identified as a commercial location, which really drove the decision making for the landowners to buy that land. And they've obviously been working through the discussion paper process and then the PSP process, as well as just a feasibility perspective of how to use that land, and have identified what they believe is still the best use of that land, which is for a commercial activity. So noting, of course, that we've got the neighbourhood centre, which has a particular outcome towards more the retail focus and community focus. The view of the landowners on this corner would be that the two options put forward in the PSP, one being high density residential, wouldn't be the best outcome for that corner, given that, again, like I made in my previous submission, we're talking about probably two of the biggest roads and most trafficked roads in the structure plan. So I think a residential interface on that corner wouldn't be a desirable outcome. Given that we are talking about two roads with a high volume of traffic, what they've identified is more a service retail use. So they're talking uses like the service station, associated things that might go along with that, like a tyre repair or those sorts of other activities, food and drink premises, childcare, medical centre, things that benefit from a centralised location and can leverage off a town centre and a higher order road. So the basis of that submission was largely around identifying that out of the two options, we felt that the mixed use zone was the best zone to pursue there, given that it opens up a wide range of other uses. It complements the major neighbourhood centre on the other side, and probably again feeds into my previous discussion around that need for some more thought and advocacy around what we're actually creating at that intersection. In my view, I think we should be creating a lower speed environment, perhaps not a town centre road outcome. Maybe that would be appropriate on Kerr Road to some extent, but probably not on the Riverina Highway, but more of something I'd probably liken to Barella Road, maybe in certain parts, and with some upgrades applied to it. So yeah, I think we need to do a bit more work in the implementation side around that. And I should say we're happy with the response from the council around that side, given that the implementation is really where we need to get into the detail of the zone. But our position would be that we really want that land to be continued to identified for commercial use.
Okay. Any questions, councillors, on that one? Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you for your presentation on that one. Given that the area has changed through to David Christie, if I may, what are the opportunities moving forward for that to be a commercial centre on that corner, if they so wish to pursue that?
Yep.
Mr. Christie.
Yep, thank you for the question, and for you, Mayor Mack. So, as David indicated, the structure plan, when it exhibited, said that the major neighbourhood centre residentials would be further investigated through the planning proposals, whether they would be R3, medium density residential, or an MU1, which is a mixed use zone with more of a commercial focus. So at this stage, our response to them had been that that'll still get played out through the planning proposal process. A number of questions you need to ask, but the likelihood of an MU1 zone on that corner, with some considerations that Dave mentioned earlier, did make sense. But we've got to go through that actual process as part of the planning proposal. Still, just to answer that question, but that was our response, which I believe they were happy with.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you're done, Mr. Hunter. Next one.
All right.
Yep.
Last one, and then I'll sit back down. The next submission was on behalf of Peter Henry, who lives at 154 Kawana Road, which is immediately south of Bells Reserve. And in the current PSP, and in fact its current zoning is R1 general residential with a 450 square metre minimum lot size, which you'll see from the submission that the landowner acknowledges is not a practical outcome. Even at that zoning, the ability to create a general residential outcome on that land with that much of a biodiversity constraint is unworkable. So the draft recommendations in the PSP was for, I think, in a C3 or a C4 outcome. The preference of the submitter was to land on a C4 and identify an outcome that allowed a balance between environmental protection and residential land use. And I think where we've landed generally is something that the landowner is happy with. But the main point that we would like to make to it is that the landowner themselves, and I think from council's perspective, I'm happy for someone to correct me if I'm wrong, haven't had enough time to really properly consider on the ground the environmental constraints. So certainly Peter, who lives there, has observed it, and I guess in his own opinion is that there's quite a lot of development potential of the land. There is still some vegetation on it. There's some large vegetation on it. It's abutting the Bells Road Reserve. So there does need to be some protection of that outcome. But there needs to be some time to properly ground truth it, do the right environmental studies and actually work out what that right size is. So I noted that the recommendation was for a 20 hectare portion of land to be set aside for protection. We would probably prefer that to be an indicative side rather than an actual recommendation in a policy. We're not disputing that there needs to be a level of protection and a buffer, but without having enough information, either from the landowner side or council side, it feels a bit premature to be designating what that particular size is right now, other than perhaps identifying it as an indicative buffer. So the outcome beyond that, considering a 1 to 4 hectare development size, we feel is appropriate, and again, should provide enough ability to protect vegetation and important biodiversity, even on the land that could be provided as residential housing. So we think that's a fair balance between the environmental importance and I guess the development potential of the land. So yeah, we'll again look forward to digging into that in a little bit more detail in the planning proposal, but just appreciate consideration of the PSP, giving us a little bit more flexibility for that discussion at the right time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you for your presentation. We heard from an earlier submitter in relation to green-blue corridors and the importance of their size from an urban planning perspective. Do you have a view on some of those observations that were shared today?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, I think it's important to have the connections. I think that was something that was lacking in the previous structure plan. I don't know. I think it's maybe more of an ecological ecologist question than a planning question. 20 to 30 meters sort of seems to be the norm in my observations for those sorts of things, but I think it depends a lot on the land we're talking about. I know in a couple of the submitters that I've just gone through, there's large creek corridors that I think are 30 meters wide, maybe even 40, and there's opportunity to extend those a little bit, and we might only be talking about adding another 10 meters, but that could then be a 50-meter corridor that's involving a creek. So I think there's a lot of variables that go into it. That's probably all I can say.
Councillor Hudson.
Sorry, accidental presence.
Accidental. Okay. Mr. Hunter, I think that's you done. You can have a read now.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Okay, we have Andrew Peters, CF 6.7. Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Good evening. Good evening, councillors and executives. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My presentation is quite simple, but I think just in the first instance, I'd actually just like to congratulate and commend council's planning team, Bridget, Dave, Cindy, and Luke in particular on their efforts to date. I know this is a pretty complex process, and they've all worked terrific, done a terrific job, I think, to pull what is a very complex process together. So I just thought I'd make that acknowledgement at the start. And then secondly, so I represent Birchmore, the developer of Hilltops at 710 Riverina Highway, and simply standing here to say we support the outcomes of the finalised draft precinct structure plan. And that's it. Thank you.
No, don't leave yet. You're not leaving yet, Hope. Questions?
Sure. I think you made him come back.
Councillor Callaghan.
I'll fire on you. What specifically are you happy with the outcomes for the Hilltops precinct?
Specifically to our site.
Yeah.
So we advocated quite strongly for the relocation of the MNC onto our land, and supported the findings from council's planning team. We think that's a terrific outcome, and we're looking forward to getting on with delivering that outcome.
Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Thanks for your presentation, Andrew. Brief that it was. Why do you want the MNC so badly on that land?
I don't think it's a case of wanting it so badly. We just think that's the best outcome. And in terms of us as developers, it's something that we do, and we think we're well placed to do it, and our land was the most suitable.
Councillor Callaghan.
Just a follow-up question. It was some time ago that we approved the DA for Hilltops, and I believe it had 19 pages of consent at the time. So a lot perhaps has changed over that time. But can you please remind me what that space was originally earmarked for before the precinct structure plan before us today?
Mr. Christie.
Thanks for the question, and for you, Mayor Mac. So, as was indicated in Mr. Hunter's submission earlier, that the western side of that Kerr Road intersection in the 2013 plan had the MNC, and the general residential was on the eastern side. So the structure plans propose the swapping of that. And as I mentioned there earlier, the original exhibit did have a 3.3 hectare area identified for the major neighbourhood centre too. In response to the submission, it was proposed for it to be shrunk slightly to 2.7 hectares. That was supported by staff with consideration to the retail floor space strategy and a whole variety of other strategies that we do have that would still be capable of accommodating the major neighbourhood centre needs, especially with consideration of the opportunity for mixed use to occur on some of those major neighbourhood centre residential just around that.
Thank you.
Andrew, just in relation to the MNC and the structure of that your development, there's a lot of discussion we saw when we looked at the DA some time ago, but there was a lot of emphasis on lifestyle and complementing that lifestyle. Is this why the MNC is so important in terms of its location? Because I know the one on the lower side is a lot smaller, which again is negotiable at this point in relation to the planning proposal. So in terms of what you're proposing, is this sort of something that you value because of what you're trying to achieve on the site in general?
Yeah, it certainly adds a significant amount of value, we think, to the overall development and the precinct, and also our commitment to ensure it is delivered in a timely manner. I think it will bring a lot of amenity to the local residents. We've also proposed to increase the density. While this will be considered under a future DA, we've also proposed to increase the density of some of the housing that sits adjacent to provide further housing options for people within the community. And there's also been consideration to the linkage in how co-locating this amenity and the community amenity to open space, and they're currently approved open space, which is on the land at the moment.
So the LSG4, is that on your land as well? Local sports ground in the bottom corner?
Thanks for the question, Mac. No, the LSG 4's on council land. It is the I think it was the Willinga liquid trade waste that's been remediated. But that's the LSG 4 that's just on the southeast corner, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Sorry, I'm having a lot of difficulty with my docs on tap at the moment, so looking and referencing maps is a bit tricky. With regards to the MNC, I think I've seen an indicative drawing, obviously, which indicates sort of commercial with a area around the outside with a large central car park core. Certainly from my perspective, the amenity that provides is almost none, because that's a horrible way to access shops. I think anybody who's visited like the Homemaker Centre out in East Albury would agree that getting from the centre of that car park to any of the shops is horrific, particularly in the summertime, given there's no shade. And I personally think that kind of design is very outdated as far as what we know about amenity and walkability and adaptation to climate change with increasing heat waves and that kind of thing. I was wondering if you could speak to sort of the principles around that you're looking to apply to the MNC on that land. I know it's a broad question.
Yeah, so look, I think it is a broad question. We considered, as part of our proposal, a conceptual layout. The conceptual layout tried to best align with some of the design principles that are within the existing PSP or what we had on hand, and also tried to align with some of the future tenant requirements that we're aware of. I think we're very open to the consideration of looking at some of those principles that you mentioned in more detail. I guess as we progress the design, I probably can't talk to the sort of the specifics of that design. It's more to do, I guess our initial discussion was around the use and the location of the use and the like.
So won't the design really be determined by who you actually propose this opportunity to? It's not something that's set in concrete. That's
right. I think we look to propose. Excuse me. Sorry, you have to excuse my red eyes. It's the hay fever. It's not the PSP process. We will certainly have to address a number of the key or the major tenant requirements. That's a big consideration for us. But also, I guess we're very considerate to council's planning requirements and the key sort of design guidelines that are incorporated into the PSP. But yes, there are a number of stakeholders that have a very important say in the ultimate look and feel and operation of the centre.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andrew. That's it for questions, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 6.8, Elizabeth Lethbridge. Just pull that down a little bit, it'll come down. Yep, there you go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors and the executive. As the others have, I'd like to acknowledge all the work you've all put into this so far to get it as far as it's gone. There's only a couple of parts of the recommendations that I want to address, and you've heard some people speak on them already. Generally, the changes proposed in this plan are reflective of the social needs of a growing and cohesive community, and that's what we're trying to build, and also to new understandings of climate science and the environment in their effect on mental and physical health. I had a couple of points. One was to please make wider wildlife corridors for the reasons that Jonathan Howard has already explained, that by the time you put a footpath or a bike path, people walking their dogs, you might have a community facility and try to get wildlife into that as well as perhaps a creek. It's just too much into a narrow area. One of the things we do know about native birds is that they prefer to be away from human activity. So the edges of a wildlife corridor are not so well populated by birds. They tend to gather in the middle, and it needs to be a certain width to allow the birds to live and forage there. and also drop their waffle seeds and things like that that keep the corridor alive and growing for our squirrel gliders. Personal story, I've been out checking next boxes for the last month. We have a very low proportion of joeys this year. That's probably just due to the dry spring, but they only live from 3 to 6 years. If we have another couple of years like that and they're put under pressure by living in narrow areas, and that's foraging pressure because there's only a certain number of trees in flower at certain times that they rely on, another couple of years like that and we could be facing a population collapse and council could be dealing with another vulnerable threatened species. Okay, my second point was retaining high forested areas, and that's speaking to the area east of Bells Reserve. And I note there that it was the area to the east was previously marked as residential, now been marked as environmental management, and this is a great decision. There are a significant number of large trees and other vegetation in this area. I drove through it a couple of days ago. Well, not through it, past it. I wish that this approach would cover all of Thagoona's undeveloped areas where there are forests, not that there's many. It's short-sighted to claim that it's acceptable to fell a 40-year-old tree because it doesn't yet have hollows. There's no way to compensate for or recoup those lost 40 years of growth. So to me, it's really important that healthy, well-growing trees should be retrained. And I note in attachment 5, there's a recommended change and the proposed lot size for that area was to drop to between 1 and 4 hectares. I still think that we should stick with at least the minimum recommended 10 hectares for that area. I know there are photographs provided in one of the submissions that show basically bare grazed land, but the great majority of the area actually has tree growth on it. Some of it's not significant quality by the looks of it, it's just spindly scrub, but there are many, many large trees that I think need to be retained. The third point I'd like to make goes back to Councillor Bullivant's comment on the Riverina Highway going through the proposed major neighbourhood centre of the conjunction of Kerr Road there. With 1,000 lots proposed to the south of Riverina Highway, we need to talk about how pedestrians are going to cross that road to attend the shops. Whether there's to be a flyover, a reduced speed, or whatever, that's something that really needs to be considered. Not specifically in the precinct structure plan, but I just want to bring council's attention to that. My final point's a little bit cheeky. Did want to remind councillors that it's not council's role or obligation to guarantee risk-free investment in the land development arena. For good governance and for the trust of businesses and to sustain good business, it's right that council should make change slowly and with good warning. But if someone land banks over, let's say, a speculative 20 years, it's unrealistic not to expect some change in zoning and planning laws. So while some landowners might feel aggrieved that a lot of their land has now been suggested that it might be allocated to things which may or may not develop, such as neighbourhood centres, they also need to remember that over 20 years their land's increased in value by a significant amount and that should compensate them for the loss of a small part of their speculative investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you for your presentation this evening. I just wanted to acknowledge your comment about pedestrian access across Riverina Highway, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. I don't think there's any safe passage for a major stretch all the way down to really Young Street there. So I acknowledge that comment and absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you. There needs to be safe access for pedestrians across that stretch of road, and I highlight the hospital as being one of those areas as well of critical need. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, question?
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Thank you for your presentation, Elizabeth. With regards to the blue-green network and the corridors, it sounds like you've done quite a lot of work and spent a lot of time in our existing corridors. In your experience or in your observation, when residential land does abut a wildlife corridor, is there degradation within a certain proximity, regardless of the width of the corridor? It could be 20 metres wide, it could be 200 metres wide. Is there degradation that occurs on the boundary between the two?
It's to blow in weed seeds tend to blow in. They seem to come in off the roads and things like that, and domestic lawn grasses and things like that do tend to go into the edges, but not as much as you might think. I don't think it's more a matter of light. And if birds are on the edges, you'll notice, for example, if you drive down the Hume Highway past Cheltenham, you'll notice the edge of the forest is completely full with wattles because they are an edge growing species. In Thurgoona, we don't seem to have so many of those, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that the corridors are not wide enough for the birds to feel comfortable living there for a long time. Certainly there are a lovely variety of birds that we get in this area, but I'm concerned that if we narrow the corridors and have houses so close to them, even with a road separating them, that can't be undone, and that over the long time, I feel the forest might deteriorate, or the treed areas along the water lines. But I'm not an expert, so I can't bring you expert knowledge on that. I'm sorry.
Follow-up question in the
Thank
same
you.
vein. Certainly, it's my observation as someone who lives near the border of Nalcan Hill that on the boundaries, even amongst the asset protection roads and that kind of thing, that there are many garden escapees and exotic plants and that kind of thing. But even beyond that, I suppose, in your observation, even if it's a corridor where there isn't, say, a footpath or an existing, sort of like a playground or any other, I guess, human created use, have you observed things like maybe the construction of illegal tracks or jumps that kids make, that kind of thing? And I guess my question then is, if that sort of thing is largely inevitable, do you think that speaks to the need for a wider corridor? Because ultimately there's going to need to be a buffer.
From Vaughan Road, which is near the Thurgoona football ground, and then up to Brooklyn Fields, there was originally a disturbance caused by putting the gas and the services up it's 8 Mile Creek and the confluence of Woolshed, but it runs along 8 Mile Creek to the western side. That's now used as a golf cart driving track and has become completely, the soil itself is completely compressed. There's no grass on it, very badly damaged. I don't blame local residents for wanting to make their own tracks, but there's quite a noticeable golf cart sized track which now goes from Brooklyn Fields along the riparian area, actually drives across the creek and goes down to the eastern side of the bridge on Thurgoona Drive and under that bridge and into the golf course. I think it's the third tee or something. I'm not sure of where it is on the golf course, but there's certainly a quite heavily used golf cart track that's been put there, which has now diminished that edge. As you say, there's an edge on both sides because it's a confluence of also 9 Mile Creek comes in there, I think, or the extension of 8 Mile. So yes, that's something that needs to be taken into account, is how people use them. And the other thing we find, of course, and it's not a bad use, but it carries its effect, is children building cubbies, sheets of tin and bits of timber and things like that. So people use it as they would, but I mean, that's a nice thing to see that, people are interacting with their environment, and I think that should be encouraged. But the environment needs to be wide enough to cope with that little bit of peripheral damage.
Councillor Bullivant.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. A question to the relevant member of staff. Mr. Christie, I've just through the conversations tonight we've had with our presenters, I've heard the blue and green corridors mentioned quite a few times, and obviously, if people are saying that it's a 20-metre corridor or 30-metre corridor, have we got evidence within the city of extra corridors that we're putting with developments to maintain wildlife corridors?
Yep, thank you for the question, and for you, Mayor Mac, and probably just for a bit of clarification. So there's a wide-ranging ribbon network of sea-free zone land, which has been there since 2010. That typically has an 80-metre width, generally around 30 to 40 metres either side of the centre. Of course, there are some bits where it's a little bit lower, but typically that's an 80-metre width. The the structure plan or the reviewed structure plan introduces linear parks alongside a couple of those areas, especially around those areas we just talked through around the Nordcon land, etc. And those linear parks generally are between 20 and 50 metres in width as well, looking at it. So some of these areas are a minimum of 100 to over 100 metres in width around some of these areas where there also may not be existing vegetation. They may be produced and saved for future corridor enhancement down the track as well. So just a bit of clarification where it's talking around the linear parks, and it does talk around 20 to 50 metres in width typically. That's in addition to the C3 land that goes through a number of these corridors, which is typically around 80 metres in width. So from our end, we believe there is a reasonable degree of protection. Obviously, any urban development has that opportunity to appropriately deal with its interface and to try to minimise or mitigate any opportunities for encroachment. And that's when you come down into your development application level, which starts to look around how you do that interface appropriately. Some of it is around separating the residential use, such as use of perimeter roads and the like. It doesn't mitigate all danger, but it does remove the invasion from backyards and people throwing rubbish over their back fence. But also, most importantly, it puts informal surveillance and potential formal surveillance along these areas as people use those networks to walk through. They can see them from their front yard, which then tends to discourage some of that illegal construction activity, etc., that might happen if it's over the rear fence of people.
Thank you. Just a final statement there, Mac. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. It was invaluable. The pleasing for me out of the outcome was that we've actually got kids outside playing and building cubby houses, which is a really good thing.
Potential builders and engineers.
And engineers.
Thank you. There appears to be no further presenters. Just clarification on one of the presenters, Mr. Peters. I was sort of a bit confused as to where we got the idea that you were going to construct something in that manner. The Noble Centre, it's actually in the Thurgoona Warringah plan as an artist depiction by the staff. So you don't feel you're wedded to that design. That's all. That's where the confusion is, yeah. And the car park is in the middle, running onto Riverina Highway, which in the current state wouldn't work anyway, I don't think. Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time tonight to the presenters. And I'd just like the councillors to stop back for a moment for a confidential discussion. If they can, if you want to take a couple-minute break and use the toilet, we can reconvene. Thank you.